Jauhigi, Programs Coordinator with ASHI, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar, Sharing the Load, Aggregating Renewable Energy Purchases with Others, organized in partnership with Customer First Renewables. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, ASHI's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. ASHI members represent around 20% of the colleges and universities in the US, as well as institutions in 20 countries, including Finland and Saudi Arabia. You can learn more about ASHI on our website, www.aashe.org. We provide an extensive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events such as today's webinar and an annual conference and expo, which will be held this year, October 15 to 18 in San Antonio, Texas. Our prices and schedule at a glance are already available, so please visit conference.ashi.org for more information, and we hope to see you there. I also wanted to let you know about our partner organization's upcoming event. The American Council on Renewable Energy, ACORE, unites business, policy, and finance to accelerate the transition to a renewable energy economy. Their National Renewable Energy Policy Forum is coming up on March 16th in Washington, D.C., and it may be of interest to the audience of this webinar. For more on this event, visit acorepolicyforum.org. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to webinars@ashi.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the option to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future events. So please fill out the post-webinar survey, and thank you in advance for letting us know your thoughts. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. Presentation materials will also be available after the live broadcast. I'd like to introduce today's webinar presenters and agenda. In the interest of time, I will not go over their bios, but you can find this information on the ASHI website under this webinar listing. Terence Pantheni-O'Keely, Engagement Manager with Customer First Renewables, will start us off with an overview of large-scale renewable energy. Joe Higgins, Director, Infrastructure Business Operations with the MIT Department of Facilities, and Julie Newman, Director of the Office of Sustainability and Lecturer at MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning, will tell us about MIT's recent large-scale renewable energy procurement, which is part of an aggregated purchase with 2 other buyers in Boston. Terence will finish the presentation with next steps for others interested in aggregated large-scale renewable energy procurement, and will finish the webinar with Q&A. So finally, it is my pleasure to welcome all attendees, and thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to turn to Terence to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Data. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, welcome to everybody. As Data kindly just introduced, my name is Terence Pantheni-O'Keely. I'm an engagement manager with Customer First Renewables. I'm going to start off today's webinar with a brief introduction to the large-scale renewable energy space and talk a little bit about some of the drivers that are pushing higher ed institutions and others towards that space. But before I do that, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce who Customer First Renewables is for everybody's context, CFR for short. We're an advisory services firm that is focused 100% on helping end users to identify and implement renewable energy solutions. We have no affiliation on technology with any developers or any particular project, as we sit on the same side of the table as customers throughout the journey of strategizing, identifying, contracting, and implementing renewable energy solutions. So we work hand in hand and really side by side with large end users to jointly develop a renewable energy strategy, to analyze financial risks and technical analysis on projects and anything that comes up that is required by the end users during the process, along with helping through the change management process, because this is often a significant departure from business as usual for most organizations, and so it takes a fair amount of time and briefing cross-functional groups and getting everybody aligned with the direction the organization is trying to move in. Our team comes from a diverse set of backgrounds, not just as energy developers, which is my background, but also within the consulting space, within the environmental and sustainability non-profit space, the corporate and financials, and so we bring a range of different skills to the table that you can see in the bottom left corner to help successfully bring about renewable energy solutions for organizations. And lastly, we were the technical advisor who helped shepherd the MIT Boston Medical Center and Post Office Square transaction that you'll hear more about once Julie and Joe talk about their project in a few minutes. So for many organizations and higher ed organizations in particular, I think a lot of you probably face a similar set of circumstances, and hopefully the three boxes on the slide in front of you resonate a little bit with some of the experiences that each of you are facing. On the one hand, a lot of campuses and schools and universities have set increased climate or greenhouse gas goals and commitments, as is seen by the signatories to the Second Nature Climate Leadership Commitment, as we see from the performance reporting standards in ASHI stars and other such manifestations of these increased goals and objectives. Secondly, energy is becoming either more and more strategic or more of a challenge for many organizations, whether your campus is currently growing or is expected to grow in the future, and the corresponding energy usage growth that comes along with that. Secondly, energy costs are quite volatile, and it is often a challenge for organizations to keep a consistent budget on their energy spend. And lastly, with kind of the increasing rollout of technology in our day-to-day lives and in campuses in particular, often that creates a more and more energy-intensive campus. Thirdly, although there's often a number of initiatives underway, the gains are often fairly limited and certainly insufficient to be able to meet what some of the goals are. So whether that's efficiency measures, demand-side management, or perhaps even some on-site renewables that have been rolled out, those measures are insufficient. So there's a climate gap for many organizations that they're currently facing, and there's some uncertainty about what the best course of action is for how that gap can be closed. And what you'll hear about today and what is happening across the market more broadly, both within the higher education space, but across the corporate and institutional space more broadly, is many organizations are contracting for large-scale renewable energy from off-site sources. So what we're looking at on the page in front of you now is a growth in large-scale renewable energy contracts that have been put in place by corporations, institutions, higher ed organizations over the past 9 years or so. As you'll see, as of about 2013 onwards, there's been really significant growth in the number of organizations pursuing these types of solutions. And many of the names that you're seeing there might look like corporations, but if you look in the table on the left-hand side, you'll see that many campuses, many higher ed institutions have pursued these types of transactions too. Now let me spend a couple minutes talking about why all of these organizations have pursued these types of solutions. There's a number of different drivers that lead organizations to pursue these, and I'm going to delve into each one briefly after this. But to summarize them, cost savings that arise from a wholesale energy transaction is one component. Those are savings that can be applied to your broader energy budget or anything else, or any other budget for that matter. The second is the ability to reduce your future price risk. So through contracting for large-scale renewables, it provides an opportunity to hedge against the volatility of energy markets and the growing trend of energy price over time. The third principal driver at the bottom of the framework is the sustainability impact and the reductions on greenhouse gases that organizations are able to capture. And the fourth are a catch-all for other strategic benefits, whether that be PR and marketing opportunities, whether it be research opportunities, or anything else. Let me take a moment just to walk through each of those four one at a time. So for cost savings first, just want to briefly walk you through how these transactions typically work so that you can get an understanding for how a savings or a positive margin can often be taken away from the projects. So on the left side of the framework, you'll see a cost bucket. Those costs are made up on the one hand of a fixed PPA price that is typically fixed throughout the life of the contracts, which can range from anywhere from 12 to 15 to 20, 25 years. As well as a few additional costs in those red boxes that relates to facilitating the transaction actually happening, whether that be fees to the independent system operator, whether that be to an agent that's scheduling and dispatching the output of a wind or a solar farm on your behalf. So adding those costs together on the one hand and layering those against the revenues, which are the gray column and those blue boxes. So the gray column represents the revenue coming from the wholesale market. So most of these transactions are located somewhere off-site, although not exclusively. There are some on-site opportunities, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a moment. But for the off-site transactions, as the power is generated and delivered onto the grid, that creates a revenue associated with that power delivered on the grid that equates to the gray bar. In addition to those, there are a few other sources of revenue, perhaps the capacity rights for a project, as well as the time of day premium, which for solar is typically a positive impact because the generation of solar happens in the daytime when prices are peaked, so you capture those peaks and that associates with the time of day premium. For wind, it's typically a negative figure because the generation is commonly more at night when prices are a little depressed. So layering those two against each other, you get that white box, that $2.2 in this representative example, which is the margin from the project. So for an off-taker like a higher ed institution, in exchange for your $44 PPA price plus those additional costs, you get that $41 in revenues plus those additional revenues, leaving you net with about $2.2 for you to apply to your retail purchases back at your campus. And that is kind of shown on the right-hand side there with the brown box and the yellow box. So the 2.2 would help lower that grid power price by 2.2 per megawatt hour. That's how the cost savings are created. I should point out one additional point quickly. That 2.2 is expected to grow over time. It will change as that gray bar changes with the wholesale markets, but part of the analysis that is important that everybody does in selecting their project is to get comfortable with what that gray bar is, and as a result, what the margin is going to be over the life of the project. Now to just shift gears a little bit to how these solutions help reduce risk. So the question starts with understanding how your business as usual costs fluctuate over time. So every 1 to 3 years, or however long your retail contracts are, you're exposed to whatever the prevailing market prices are at that time. So although often costs are fixed on a 1 to 3 year basis, on a long-term view you are exposed to energy cost volatility. Now that center green graph represents the transaction I just walked you through on the prior slide, where the light green section is essentially the margin that comes out from the transaction. So by layering that green margin, that light green margin on top of your business as usual spend, you're essentially flattening the peaks and overall flattening the growth of your spend in the long term. So what you see on the right-hand side there. So that is how these solutions help mitigate against the volatility of energy spend and help fix your prices so that they're more, or rather your energy spend, so that it's more predictable over the long term. The third component of the value is obviously the environmental piece and the sustainability impact. This is an example of how one of CFR's other higher ed clients was able to achieve their sustainability goals. The blue line that runs at about the 70,000 mark represents the goal the organization had set. The blue wedge at the top are the gains they expected to make through efficiency measures. The very thin yellow sliver relates to transportation efficiencies as they shifted their transportation fleets to more efficient and electric vehicles. You'll probably notice a very small dark green line between the yellow and the thick green chunk. That relates to the gains this particular university was able to make through on-campus renewables. And then through layering in their off-site large-scale solar project, they were able to make the gains associated with that big green chunk, allowing them to achieve their 2025 goal in 2016. The last component of the value proposition that's driving many organizations towards large-scale renewable solutions is this diverse other benefits catch-all. And there's a variety of opportunities here that will vary from one organization to the next. But just to call out a few examples, obviously the PR campaigns, whether that be to alumni or prospective students, can help show the leadership that an organization is taking in this space. The research component is obviously one that is particularly of interest to higher ed institutions, and I believe that Joe and Julie will talk a little bit more about how MIT has taken advantage of the research opportunities. And then lastly, just the broader community impact that these solutions can have, especially through an aggregated approach. So as the MIT example will show, bringing along a few additional members of the Boston community, MIT was able to have a broader impact beyond just its campus by helping one of the local hospitals, Boston Medical Center, as long as one of the local real estate companies called Post Office Square to address their greenhouse gas impact also. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Joe and Julie to talk a little bit about their experience and the project from their perspective.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Terrence. Thank you again for joining us today. I also want to thank everyone for your interest and enthusiasm for this project, both in its current state and emerging, which we'll tell you about. Joe and I are really at a point where we believe our institutions are so well positioned to amplify our impact collectively, and I believe Terrence just told a part of that story from the groundwork. regardless of what size project your university may be able to implement. And I think that's an important takeaway from today's presentation. So just to reintroduce ourselves, I'm Julie Newman, the Director of Sustainability at MIT, and I'm here with my good colleague, Joe Higgins, the Director of Business Operations. So,
good afternoon, everyone.
Great. So I'm going to begin our presentation by providing some context for you, which provides the background as to the why, and Joe will walk you through the process and the commitment. And clearly, we will, all three of us, along with Terrence, will all be available for discussion and questions at the end here. So to begin, and I just want to make sure, many of you, I presume, on the call have similar stories, so I think this context is essential. Our story begins here at MIT in the fall of 2014 when the MIT president called for a year-long dialogue on how MIT should respond to the unprecedented and pressing challenge of climate change. And I just want to make clear, which was different from a previous role, that was the focus of the discussion, not how should we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas goal emerged from the dialogue, but was not at all a driver of the dialogue. Happy to elaborate on that at some point if anyone has any interest. So then fast forwarding, in October of 2015, what emerged from that year-long dialogue was the MIT Plan for Action on Climate Change. That was published, and it articulated that MIT was willing to take an unequivocal position that climate change is one of the most important challenges facing our society, and that MIT will take on many of the scientific, technological, and social challenges needed to contribute to the understanding and mitigations of the impact of global warming. So I presume that's also why many of you are on this call today, but that's what grounds our success here. So the other piece, as you can see from the visual, is that the plan is organized around 5 pillars, and it seeks to align the full array of expertise within the Institute to advance solutions not only through academic research and teaching, but also through the practice on our campus. So in summary, and again, I encourage for anybody interested, this is all online, but there were 5 pillars which has really grounded MIT's commitment to climate and enabled this remarkable fabric of engagement across the Institute. So Pillar A, as you can see, is regarding our understanding of climate change and how to advance novel targeted mitigation and adaptation solutions. It's about accelerating. Pillar B is a call for the acceleration of progress towards low and zero carbon energy technologies, and they're in the process of fundraising to launch, I believe it's now up to 9 low-carbon research centers out of the MIT Energy Initiative. Pillar C calls for the education of a new generation of climate, energy, environmental innovators. Pillar D is how can MIT share what we know and learn from others around the world. So how do we amplify, hence the role of these webinars for that matter, how do we amplify our lessons learned and our opportunities and opportunities for co-production of knowledge. And Pillar E is where Joe and I fit in, which is how do we engage, leverage MIT's community and campus as a test bed for change and for solution development. And that is where our goal fits. It's not the focal point of our plan, but clearly it's an important part in terms of mitigating climate change on campus. So as you can see, we set a reduction goal for as a floor, not the ceiling, of at least 32% by 2030 from a baseline of 2014 emissions. And where that came from, and again, happy to elaborate on this, but just in short, after much deliberation, which I'm sure many of you can relate to, we decided to align ourselves with the Clean Power Plan under the previous administration as a starting place. So MIT recognizes that finding solutions to climate really require an interdisciplinary approach across the institute to mobilize not only the research and educational resources, but as you can see, also the operational practices to have maximum impact. And that's where the partnership with Joe and I has come from. All right, so moving on, MIT has embraced this challenge and is now committed to reducing our emissions. And I just want to be clear that our commitment is 32% by 2030, below our 2014 baseline as the floor, but the aspiration is to become carbon neutral as soon as possible. We do not have an end date on that quite yet. The challenge, though, as we know, is that there's not a clear path forward for large energy-intensive research institutions such as MIT to meet the necessary GHG reduction levels, nor sufficient understanding of the optimal balance of new technology deployment, energy efficiency investments, and on-site, off-site renewable energy procurement.
Yeah, we're going to try to get the screen up here. Sorry, folks.
So the
present mode here.
Yep. So hopefully you can see it. The pathway slide that's there now has been developed. There it is.
Yep.
Perfect. So we've developed a pathway and strategy framework to reach and eventually surpass our GHG, our greenhouse gas reduction goal. And this is merely just to give you an example of how we're framing our thinking. So you can see from the baseline on the far left of the screen, you can also note that we've estimated that we anticipate a growth of approximately 10%, which encompasses both new construction and renovation projects. We also are in the process of enhancing our power plant, but also that which will lead to greater efficiency, and that neutralizes the growth based on our calculations. And in pretty standard mode to many of our peers in this realm, we're looking at efficiency gains in buildings, again, from energy efficiency projects to design. I'm going to skip over the on-site for a moment, and then we jump into how do we amplify and really engage the opportunities off-site. I want to come back to the 1 to 3% now and also towards the end, because as you could see from the example that Terrence gave, that doesn't tell the story that we need to tell. And so in terms of what is the role of renewable energy, so we've taken that 1 to 3%, and we'll mention this later on with the research, and we're figuring out how do we leverage that not just as 1 to 3% towards our goal, but really turn that into how do you amplify that impact? And we believe that's where the commitment to the power purchase agreement comes in. So again, we'll speak to that in greater detail shortly. And the last part here is that just to circle back to how we're able to have really, from start to finish, I think when it was at Joe, 9 months. I think I can speak for both Joe and I. Part of how we were able to accelerate this engagement was not only the perfect storm of timing with CFR and ABC that you'll hear about shortly, but was our ability for Joe and I with other partners to run a due diligence to truly understand how is this commitment going to advance all 5 pillars of our plan for climate action, which then led to make the leap from being a facilities project on the side to a truly robust multi-stakeholder endeavor that brought together operations, administrative staff, together with faculty, researchers, and students. And that was our game-changing pivot that we had here at MIT. And we seized the opportunity to demonstrate leadership in greenhouse gas reduction strategies and truly tie off-site campus investments to the mission of the Institute and to our impact and to the campus with our goal of amplifying impact over time. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Joe, and we look forward to a discussion at the end.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. And thanks, Terrence. So I'm going to take probably the next 15 minutes or so and share with everyone some of the more detailed facts and figures about the Summit Farms project, and along the way kind of pointing out what we think were the moments of truth for everyone here within our community, as well as some of the thinking and decision process that really went into to get this amazing large-scale renewable energy project. So Julie shared a little bit of the why, and I would say that the one slide that you're looking at currently, this was our business case. It really boiled down to just this. Yes, there was a lot of economics and underlying fundamentals, but this was really, it met broader goals for our organization. So it really wasn't just purely about, reducing our footprint. It appealed to a much larger need. So I'm going to jump into a little bit about the who the players are in this. In August of 2016, so you know, a little bit about 6 months ago, MIT, Boston Medical Center, and Post Office Square Corporation, so I refer to them as the small, medium, and large diverse organizations, we're the offtake partners for this large-scale project, which we call Summit Farms. So we formed an alliance to purchase the electricity from this project, and the real goal was to add a very significant new asset to the grid. I think that was all of our particular goals. So MIT, as you can see here, committed to buying 73% of the power from the solar farm, Boston Medical 26, and Post Office Square. And as we'll talk a little bit about, those percentages for Boston Medical and Post Office Square allow them to make a claim of carbon neutrality within their respective organizations, and MIT 72% gets us halfway towards our 32% reduction goal by 2020. So how this all came about was the convener that we call it. So the convener of these partners was called A Better City. So A Better City is a Boston-Cambridge membership organization here. Members include healthcare, higher ed, large corporations, small corporations, real estate organizations, et cetera. And I think ABC saw an opportunity to sort of boldly leverage their regional network to achieve significant global benefits. So both Cambridge and Boston have sort of net zero emissions goals by 2050, and building efficiency alone and transportation enhancements weren't going to get us there, and we needed to do something much bolder. And they saw this as an opportunity that acting collectively has a much broader impact than going it alone. So ABC and the membership ran a sort of a selection process to find a subject matter expert to help us along this journey. So that's where we found Customer First Renewables, who was our consultant and subject matter expert, and they actually helped us negotiate, lead, and find the project sort of from end to end. So the actual financing and the design, construction, and operation of Summit Farms is handled by Dominion. So the managing utility company that you see there, they're the ones that actually funded the project. So they put up the capital by virtue of the partners signing the agreement. So they own, operate, and maintain the facility. And that was a key reason why we liked this project, was the fact that the local utility company was going to be the owner and operator of the asset, just like they would own and operate one of their other assets. Sun Energy One is the last player. They're the developer, so they were the actual landowner for the project. And one of the other key reasons this project and site was selected was because of the technical expertise, the financial strength, and the like-mindedness of both Dominion and Sun Energy in this process that Customer First Renewables helped us vet through a number of different projects. And we'll talk about that in a second. So that's the who is involved in the project. And I will say that from the very beginning, we were very excited with the whole aggregation idea of being able to do something beyond the scale of any one individual partner in this process. So now getting on to the what and the where.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is data, but for some reason your GoToWebinar control panel is showing and it's taking part of the screen. So can you click on the orange arrow to minimize it?
Oh,
please?
sure. Sure.
Thank you.
Can't get to the. Maybe if I just unplug the monitor, you think?
I don't know.
Let's try this.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, it's gone. So if you can go back to your slide, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's on the left side now. Actually, click. There is an orange arrow. Okay, it's gone.
Oh, there. Okay. I see. So what I will do is.
Perfect. Thank you.
How's that? Okay, thanks. I'm glad you clarified that. So this is a little bit of the what and where. So the site is located in the northeast corner of North Carolina on the border of Virginia in Moyock Township in Currituck County. It's about a 30-minute car drive north of Kitty Hawk's, home of the Wright brothers. So the project actually takes the form and was created by a 25-year power purchase agreement from the three off-take partners. There's an individual power purchase agreement that each one of us has with Dominion that created this project. So it's a 650-acre parcel. It was depleted farmland. It grew soybean and some other crops for years and years, but it really wasn't good for growing anything anymore. So this seemed to be the highest and best use of the property for this project. So it's a 60 megawatt solar installation at peak capacity. And as Julie said, the project went very quickly from the time that we all signed the power purchase agreement back in September. It is actually completed and generating power today. So about 6 months from the time of signing to the time of actually putting the 60 megawatts on the grid. So just this past month, we finished the rigorous testing, and it is drawing on more than the 255,000 panels today. So in aggregate, the project is expected to put out 146 gigawatt hours of emissions-free power per year. So that abates about 119,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions, the equivalent of removing about 25,000 cars from the road each year, and powering approximately 10,000 homes each year. So that just kind of gives you a perspective of the scale. So here is a bird's eye view of the installation at Summit Farms to provide some perspective of the scale. From tip to tail, it's about 3 miles long. So for any of you that are a runner and you can do an 8-minute mile, it would take you about 28 minutes or 24 minutes to run from end to end. So it's very large. And to think about the size of this with respect to the size of MIT's campus. So our campus here in Cambridge is about 168 acres. And if you think about overlaying that onto Summit Farms, it would take up probably the equivalent area of about 4 MIT campuses, which is pretty mind-blowing for a lot of folks here to think about. It's almost 15% of the total area of the city of Cambridge. And we didn't think we were going to get a permit anytime soon to build a roof over 15% of the city of Cambridge. So North Carolina was a pretty good option for that. So one of the biggest moments of truth for us, as all the stakeholders that kind of took this journey together, was answering the question, why is North Carolina the ideal spot, and why is it not in New England? I think that a lot of folks thought that, we would be a wind power project in Maine or in New Hampshire or a solar field somewhere here in Massachusetts. So obviously targeting New England for all of us partners in Boston and Cambridge was very highly desirable at the outset. And actually, we did evaluate 41 projects that Customer First Renewables brought to us. And they were across 14 states, and they were both wind and solar ready projects or soon to be ready projects. 11 of those projects were in New England that we took a look at, but many of them came with challenges at this very significant scale. There were some very complicated economic considerations, regional market volatility in terms of hydropower and some other things that were coming into the market. And there was also some very specific project development risks. So it was the risk of the partners who would potentially build out the project, the people who would own and operate the project, or the site itself where you would have to go very, very long distances to hook into a transmission line. So ultimately, the Summit Farms project was the best opportunity for the partnership groups for 5 reasons. So I'll go down those. The first was it had very favorable economics, as you can see in the upper right-hand quadrant there of the slide, for the total cost of power delivered to us. So from an economics point of view, it was an incredibly strong opportunity. The second was the commitment from the local utility company, Dominion. Dominion agreed to finance, own, operate, and maintain the generating asset as one of the own in their particular region, and they were very like-minded with MIT and the other partners in terms of moving towards a decarbonized electric grid in their regions. The third was the ease of access to a transmission line for this project with the connectivity to the load center. So the actual transmission line ran over the Summit Farms project. So we really were able to just plug into that, and we'll see a picture of that in a second. The fourth reason why this was the best opportunity for us was the development team's financial strength. Sun Energy One and Dominion in terms of their experience and their ability to deliver and the reputational standing in the market. So we actually took a team down to North Carolina, looked at some of the previous installations that were done, the quality that the projects were done under, the experience that the owners had. We talked to the community, there was a lot there that we had to take into consideration, because you don't want to embark upon one of these projects and commit to it and have something happen down the road where it actually doesn't come online. And then the last reason was the broader environmental benefits. So it turns out that adding renewable capacity in the grid in North Carolina, which is the PJM grid, has significantly higher environmental and global benefits than it does if we were to build this project here in New England. The power grid at PJM is about 40% higher in terms of carbon intensity in North Carolina than it is here in New England. We have a relatively clean grid. So if you think about, climate change is a global problem. It's not a Massachusetts problem or a New England problem. But if we're to create a project, we would want to go somewhere where we have the most significant environmental benefit. So that was the moment of truth of answering the question, why not New England? And I think once we explained it, people were like, yeah, it really does change your aperture in terms of how you think about these particular projects. What you originally think is you want to have it in your backyard. It has a much broader benefit, maybe in other parts of the country or the world. So another moment of truth for us was really understanding and getting our heads wrapped around and explaining to others how the power purchase agreement and the economics works. So we are not importing the power into Cambridge. So we are going to continue to purchase power and co-generate power on our campus as we do today, kind of business as usual. This is a separate financial transaction in North Carolina. So the actual electrons aren't coming back to us under any kind of net metering. So this is how it works. So MIT and the other partners agreed to pay Dominion a fixed price for each unit of solar energy produced by Summit Farms. So as an example, let's say it's 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So given that commitment by the partners to buy the power that's produced by this farm, Dominion can go to the bank and get the capital. In this case, it was well over $100 million to actually build, own, and operate the project over its 25-year expected life. So this was zero capital cost to MIT and the partners. The renewable energy electricity from the solar project, now that it's completed, it flows into the local grid. As you can see down below, so that's PJM. And our MIT and the other partners, we have a market agent. So MIT isn't licensed to conduct power transactions. So for a very, very small fee, Customized Energy Solutions is a group located out of Philadelphia, and they do this for large scale power grids all over the country and the world, for that matter. So they act on MIT's behalf, and they take custody of the power as it comes into the grid, and they sell it on our behalf at a day ahead or a spot market. And the idea is that the resulting revenues from the sale of this power come back to MIT, and the idea is over time we actually have greater revenue for the power than what we actually paid. So the idea is, we want to be sort of in the black, so to speak. So we get paid for the power before we actually have to pay Dominion for producing the power. So we're always in a favorable economic situation. So what we were most interested in was the environmental attributes. So in the middle there, you can see the renewable energy certificates. So those are associated with the energy production, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a second. So the renewable energy certificates from this project are retained by MIT, and they're retired, and that's what we apply against our purchased electricity here in New England. So we retire the RECs to offset the campus emissions associated with our electric purchases. So overall, the economics that we projected, and we modeled it in many different ways with many different independent validations, are projected to be very favorable over the long term. But I think it's important for folks to know that we didn't actually make the case that this is a, we're in this to make money. So the way that we really presented this to our leadership, and we kind of firmly believe, is that we really wanted to look at it as a cost-neutral transaction. So that what we pay for the power is the revenue we receive for the power. At the end of the day, it's cost neutral. But I think that the biggest benefit, and Terrence talked a little bit about this earlier, and what really captured the imagination, and again, it was another moment of truth for our senior leadership, is that having a fixed price contract for power in a different region other than your own provides sort of a natural hedge against the future energy market volatility in your own area. So energy volatility in New England is very high. as demonstrated over the past years. We're very reliant upon natural gas here for our cogeneration plant. We generate our own electricity, and we use it for heating our campus and for making cooling. And the idea that we're able to have a fixed price contract that's hedged against our natural gas contract here in New England gives us a more predictable kind of long-term energy budget. And I think that's what folks here really wanted was, minimizing that volatility in terms of how we budget for utilities year over year. So to give you an example, if the cost of natural gas skyrockets in New England, we pay more for our cogen and to heat our buildings here. But in North Carolina, if the cost of natural gas goes up, we get higher revenue for the electricity that's coming off of Summit Farms. So those revenues offset some of the increased costs that we see here in New England and vice versa in this situation. So that's something I think that was a big selling aspect in terms of why this makes sense. So another key question that had to be answered was, the claims that we can make about using renewable energy when the project isn't directly supplying our facility. So the electrons don't, have a magical way of finding their way up the New England coast here to us from North Carolina. So we reached out to guidance, from the Greenhouse or from the World Resource Institute, who are actually some of the authors of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And the guidance we received is that, electricity overall in the grid, it's impossible to trace. They don't paint the renewable electrons green and they go to the places that you want them to. So it can't be pegged of where an electron generated goes to a specific user. So with the growing importance of emissions tracking, because all of us are tracking our emissions, a system was devised to enable renewable energy users and generators to be able to claim emissions-free energy supply. So the solution devised were these renewable energy certificates, or RECs. And a REC is produced for each megawatt hour of renewable energy that comes off of a project. And the owner of that REC holds the claim to that renewable energy supply. So in our case, PJM is our accountant for the grid. Customized Energy Solution is our accountant for the grid, and PJM, we have an account. So all the renewable energy RECs that are generated by Summit Farms go into an account on MIT's behalf, and we keep track of those and retire them year over year. So I think the conclusion here is that electricity supplied from the grid, when it's coupled with these renewable energy credits, enables the users to claim that they are using renewable energy. And in this case, it enables MIT to make the claim that we are using 40% of our annual campus electric use is renewable at that point. So in terms of some other significances of this, so it gives us the 40% renewable electricity claim. We talked about it reduces our campus emissions by 17%. So that's getting us halfway to our 2014 baseline reduction goal of 32%. One of the other significances of this project is it demonstrated that it is the largest aggregated purchase by non-affiliated parties in the U.S. So we just didn't go out and do this by ourselves, but it really did prove you could have a diverse, small, medium, and large organization with their own sustainability goals come together and do something of a much greater significance than just themselves. And it's also the largest higher ed solar purchase in the eastern United States. Two other organizations on the west can make similar claims. Stanford and the University of California. There may be some others, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. But we assume that the claim on the bottom there is going to be usurped by somebody else, hopefully in the very near term future as well, in terms of the aggregation by many other diverse organizations. So we talked a little bit about broader benefits. So when you really look at the region, and this was another learning for us, is that there's these sort of sub-e-grid regions in terms of how emissions are tracked throughout the United States. And the particular e-grid sub-region that this project lives in is the one that's circled there. And if you look at the marginal load that this solar farm offsets, so this is the peak generating capacity where coal and natural gas plants have to run to meet those peak loads. They're kind of very inefficient during the marginal times. This solar farm would in fact offset about 1,800 pounds per megawatt hour of CO2 emissions. And if you really add that up over a year, it equates to about 87,000 metric tons. And that's an equivalent of probably over 40% of MIT's total campus emissions from a 2014 baseline. So we're not making that claim, but I think we're encouraging others to have a dialogue around, where we have in the broader global benefit. Maybe we should quantify these goals in terms of avoided emissions from these particular peak plants. And one of the proof points that we had was very recent, and it was for our leadership, was that Summit Farms is now aiding sort of the smooth transition from a carbon energy intensive grid to a clean energy grid in this particular region. So I guess years back there was a regional coal plant in this region, and they agreed to be available at peak periods in the future. But with changing economics, I guess this coal plant is retiring from the grid sort of ahead of schedule. And rather than face the penalty of pulling out of their capacity commitments in future years, the coal facility is paying Summit Farms to be available to generate electricity during these stressed times as they transition off the grid. So we saw that as sort of de facto proof that the partnership actually added a project that was a real source of carbon emissions being replaced with renewable energy. So that was an important point for us in terms of how we think about these projects. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julie, because MIT, as another benefit, will have site access and data access to Summit Farms, and there's a much larger research agenda associated with that.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention the emerging idea here is that, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the most unique, and I would argue most significant opportunities that Joe and I recognized right from the beginning in terms of what Joe dubbed as the business case, was the opportunity to develop a formal tie between the solar farm, our researchers, that include faculty, students, and research associates around the Institute, and of course the opportunity to leverage the campus as a test bed. So that was not, I just want to emphasize, that was not an afterthought, but rather the case we made. So it was really baked into every discussion that we had, as well as into the legal documents that were that transpired. And so, as you can read from Tonio's quote, one of the ways we did this is we early on reached out to a number of faculty who manage labs focused on solar technology, particularly idea to marketplace, which is really the MIT stream here, and folks that were faculty rather focused from nano to standard panel development to distribution systems and the like, and from small scale to large scale. So it didn't take long actually to convene a number of faculty interested in this who came together, brought their postdocs in, some of their students, undergrads, PhD students, and quickly began to understand the possibility here. So we're just giving you a teaser on this today, but this is an area that we'll soon build out and go public with as we continue to formulate it on our end. I guess a couple of takeaway points, again, the multi-stakeholder engagement and baking this in right from the get-go as opposed to an afterthought. We also baked into the PPA documentation access to the data and the build out of future research on the site of the solar farm right in North Carolina, and again bringing that to the campus. And now we have actually a formalized committee that we convene on a regular basis to develop what we're now dubbing the solar test bed at MIT, that will formally connect the PPA technology opportunities for testing new technology, testing technology that's being developed at MIT or from of the spin-offs from MIT students and researchers, and emerging technologies, and seeking to provide a centralized physical anchor on campus. So that's the part you need to stay tuned with. In summary, though, we recognize that there's an unprecedented opportunity to create a solar test bed on our campus and campuses at large to really focus on de-risking emerging solar technologies and proving their viability to financiers and developers that can have an impact both nationally and globally. And again, the underlying interest here is expediting solar development and amplification.
So we want to leave without sharing at least a couple of pictures, so some action shots. So this is actual researchers working on the remote monitoring data and research, sort of back to our open campus platform here in Cambridge. In terms of some of the ingredients that go into one of these large-scale solar farms. So it was about 38,000 posts. So these are iron posts made of recycled car parts, and they drive them into the ground 8 feet deep. And this is what all the 255,000 panels are attached to. And the idea is after the usable life of the panels, you're able to have a machine that just pulls these posts out and you recycle them back in to do the next farm. So it's, as you can imagine, miles and miles of wire above ground and underground. All of the panels come together to these, because they're DC voltage, come together to be converted to AC voltage so they can go on the grid in these 40 large inverter stations that you see down here in the lower left corner. And then the project is a sun tracking panel installation, single axis. So this is sort of the leading edge tracking package. I think it's the first one deployed at scale, and we're going to be testing that out and providing feedback on that as well. So it is a utility scale project. As you can tell here, you can see the 600 acres sort of in the background on the horizon there, but this is sort of the heart where all of those arteries come together at. It's the collector substation at a very high voltage of 34,000 volts. And then that's stepped up to the transmission line, which you see in the foreground there, that cuts through the farm at 230,000 volts. So on the ground, again, one of our researchers, this is to give you a sense of the collector substation where all the power from the panels comes together. Inside, it's predominantly utility switchgear and a lot of data collection. We're surprised at how much IT equipment is across the site. So there's integrated weather stations. There's detection of the sunlight and the radiance, and probably more data points than I can probably go through on this call. So what's next for us? So now that it is generating power, it's actually the performance validation. So being able to demonstrate that it is, putting out what the weather predictions say it's going to be putting out on sort of a 24-hour, 48-hour basis, and how well we can predict that. Operationalizing a lot of the financial transactions, as well as research access to the site, and then integration with the efforts, part of the research agenda back here on our campus. So those are the three things that Julie and I and our teams are working on now that it's generating power. So before we turn over to Terrence, we thought we would just kind of hit upon, what we thought collectively were the aggregation advantages of, what we got by doing this together. We ended up with a much better end result. We thought we have a project now that has much broader global benefits than if we just did something here in our own backyard. The idea of cost sharing early on, so it was a little bit of a discovery process between all the partners. So we were able to split a lot of the consultant fees, legal fees, market agent fees, et cetera. So being able to split those costs definitely makes it more economically attractive for those looking at this particular solution. The economics from scale. So the idea of doing a 650-acre project, the economics are very good versus if you just did a 2-acre project. The ability to tap into broader and deeper networks, so between the developer and Customer First Renewables and Dominion and even all the other partners. I mean, we all came to the table with expertise from across MIT that we were able to leverage, whether it was financial strength, market strength, being able to look at predictions. We had some pretty dynamic networks we were able to tap into, and also sharing the work. So this is a very complicated exercise to go through, and the partners were able to go through, and share some of the legal work. Other people wanted to share the communications work. Other people wanted to share the on-the-boots, kind of negotiating the power purchase type agreement work. So I think we had a lot of people step forward to really do that. So you didn't have to do it sort of by yourself. And again, I think we're going to use and share our experiences from this in terms of how we de-risk sort of future projects. So last recommendations kind of for replication, because I think folks are probably going to ask at the end is, what would you say, what worked well in terms of advice you would give? The first is, this took a while for a lot of us to get our heads around at the outset. Power purchase agreement, what does it mean? What does it entail? So to allow yourself the space to have this discovery process with all of your stakeholders and making room for that along the way. And then getting the core team convened early. And I think for us, the right move was, and Julie said it took us like 9 months from the time it went from idea to signing and getting the project started, was looping in these key folks that you see here. It really is a finance deal. So to loop in finance and accounting, your research groups if you have them. The risk and legal team were huge advocates of this from the very beginning. And then we have an internal utility group, and then obviously we have a lot of resources in our sustainability office that had a much broader network that we were able to tap in terms of faculty and researchers, et cetera. So I think what made it successful, or we would recommend to folks, is really getting this core team from the beginning and to go through a mutual discovery process. And then, you know, it isn't like you have to, you know, socialize it with everybody after a decision is made. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Terrence.
Okay, great. Well, Joe and Julie, thank you so much for walking us through your experience and some of the kind of key lessons and takeaways that you gained as you went through that experience. I just want to very quickly take a couple of minutes just to kind of take a step back from everything that you've heard over the past hour and try to pull out some of the key messages, some of the key takeaways that I'd encourage everybody to think about from what you've heard today. So to start off with, if I can point everyone's attention to the bottom of the slide, and let's start off with these building blocks. So as you think about your pathway towards carbon neutrality or whatever your environmental goal are, there's going to be various building blocks to that. And as we have touched on a couple of times today, you know, things like energy efficiency measures are certainly a part. On-site renewables also certainly a part, but those alone aren't likely to be sufficient to be able to reach your goals or carbon neutrality. So the third and important building block we've been talking about today is the large-scale renewables. So think about these as a combination of options that all need to be put to work in order to be able to help close that climate gap that I outlined at the very beginning. The second thing I'd like to divert your attention to on the left side of the slide with regards to the benefits of aggregating, and Joe touched on this just a moment ago in a very succinct way. The advantages of finding large-scale projects are numerous, and we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about that, but getting up to scale can make a good project into a great project. So it's really advantageous to try to reach a sort of scale that will allow you to capture the most attractive pricing and to make this not just a sustainability decision, but also a no-brainer on the finance side of things too. Few organizations on a standalone basis have sufficient load to meet the output from a wind or a solar farm. So as you'll see, that green, orange, and light blue bars, just representative loads from 3 different organizations. Individually, none of those will be sufficiently large to be able to attract the attention of a wind or a solar developer, represented by the red bar. But if you look at the bottom of that graphic, by putting all 3 loads together, you reach the scale required in order to match the output of a facility. And that is really one of the key benefits of aggregation, is being able to capture those large-scale prices, or the prices associated with large-scale projects, even though your organization itself might not be large enough independently. So there are renewable energy solutions out there that make economic sense, and it's perhaps worth aggregating in order to be able to capture those, or perhaps required to aggregate in order to be able to capture those, as on an independent basis it could be difficult to capture them. The second thing I'd like to just take a moment to walk through before we turn things over to the Q&A, which you're all likely thinking about, is, okay, well, we've heard from Joe and Julie about this process they went through that sounds potentially long and complicated and difficult to navigate. What sorts of steps should I be thinking about to get started down this road, or to make sure that I'm checking all the boxes as I look to move down this journey? So a few suggestions, a few things to keep in mind. The first is really to determine what your business as usual scenario is. Really understand your baseline. How much electricity do you use? What is it likely to evolve towards in the future? How much do you spend? What sorts of resources does your organization have, and what sorts of appetite do they have? What sorts of partners might you want to aggregate with? Getting a really strong understanding for your baseline is an essential part. The second piece is knowing what your goals are, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a firm sustainability goal, although that obviously helps, but it could be goals around cost savings, around energy budget predictability. Whatever those are, knowing them is integral to choosing the right project for you. If you start down this road without a strong understanding of what your goals are, you're not going to pick the right project. There are thousands and thousands of projects around the US, and picking the right one is driven by what your goals are. So knowing those up front is essential. Secondly, look to external resources, leverage expertise that exists out there. Most of you on the conference today likely aren't large-scale renewable energy experts, but there are organizations out there that have resources for you to utilize, and put those to work, because it's a relatively complicated space. As Joe mentioned a moment ago, it's important to take this time to understand the space, and there are numerous resources out there to help you get a better understanding and get further up the learning curve. So utilize external resources. The next piece is around building that internal buy-in. Again, Joe pointed to it a moment ago, but I want to stress it because this is a change from business as usual. Typically, these transactions, these sorts of solutions aren't a 1 to 3 year normal retail contract that everyone is familiar with and comfortable with. So changing all of a sudden from a 1 to 3 year procurement cycle to a 15 or 25 year procurement cycle is a change management challenge, and it requires broad cross-functional buy-in. So having a large number of stakeholders bought in early on is critical to the success of these initiatives. Thirdly, understand all of the diverse value drivers. There is no one single benefit that comes from this. There's a variety, and understanding all of them helps to understand and develop the business case to help build that broad buy-in. So don't just look at it purely from the sustainability perspective or purely from the cost perspective. Get a handle on the full range of value drivers. And the last piece I'd like to point to is to develop a rigorous process, something that's going to help your organization to have firm credibility as it reaches the end of the process, or as it looks back historically as to, okay, well, how do you know that you captured the right projects? How do you know that you analyzed them correctly? How do you know that you negotiated the best terms for your PPA? And having a robust process outlined from the beginning that everyone is bought into will help give you comfort around each of those questions. So with that, I'd like to kind of wrap up my closing remarks here, and Data, I'd like to maybe hand it over to you for any questions. And just before we get into the questions, just like to thank Joe and Julie again for their excellent comments and walking us through their journey.
Thank you so much, Terence, Joe, and Julie, for sharing your expertise with us today. And we will now turn to our audience for questions. We received plenty already, but please continue submitting them, and we will try to get through all of them before the webinar ends at 4:30. If there's still questions that you have and haven't been answered, feel free to contact the presenters directly or aishi@webinars@aishi.org. So I'll turn to Terence first with a few questions, and then I'll go to MIT. So Terence, can the campus actually earn money from wind and or solar during the first year of implementation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question and is a common area of misconception. Solar resources in the U.S. today are the cheapest energy supply in the country on an unsubsidized basis. Now, that was not the case up until about a year or so ago, but as of today, that is the case. There is no cheaper energy in the U.S. than wind. Solar is the second cheapest resource. Well, solar and natural gas compete for second. And both of those renewables are at the front of that list due to the technology cost declines over the recent few years. So the short answer is that yes, absolutely, there are projects that can be net positive from year one. There are certainly examples of projects out there that are not, and there are certainly projects that are available out there today which would not be net positive from year one. But that is, part of what I was alluding to earlier in terms of there being thousands of projects out there, and knowing the one that is right for you based on your goals is really important, because you might be willing to forego savings from year one in order to be able to have a project that is, for example, in your home state. Alternatively, you might be willing to forego having that project in your home state to have a greater environmental impact or to generate savings from year one. So the short answer is absolutely, that is possible. That is not the case in every project. It requires detailed and in-depth analysis to be able to pick the projects that will be positive from year one.
Thank you, Terence. Can academic institutions inform cities or municipalities on how to greenovate, which is a combination word between green and innovate, their cities?
Yes, it's a good question, and I'll provide a few comments first, and Joe and Julie, if you have anything to add, feel free to. I think that again, the answer there is yes, and principally by setting an example that cities or certainly other key stakeholders in a city can follow. If we take, for example, the MIT Boston Medical Center and Post Office Square example, where these three organizations in the same urban area came together, it has created a lot of interest from other organizations within the Boston and Cambridge area to do similar things and to replicate the example they've set. And other organizations, not just corporations and nonprofit institutions or higher ed institutions, but also local and state governments. I should say that local and state governments themselves typically don't have that large of an energy consumption. So they can try to green their energy supply, but it is more influential for them to encourage the stakeholders and the residents and the organizations that exist in their jurisdictions to follow these types of examples. So Joe or Julie, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that, but hopefully that addresses the question somewhat.
I mean, I think the only thing to, I appreciate your comments, Terence. I think maybe one other piece to add, though we haven't explored this yet, is that the city of Cambridge has expressed an interest in, what's next, and is there an opportunity? How might one partner with a municipality versus a business? So we haven't gone down that pathway to explore that, but those are the kind of questions that Joe and I are currently fielding as we come off of this one and start to open up a dialogue as to what is next. How do we continue to amplify large-scale renewables, again, be it in New England or nationwide or beyond, and how might one do that? So I think that's a good start. I guess the only other piece that is, probably like many of you have, there are many sustainability-related groups within the city of Cambridge and Boston. We have the Green Ribbon Commission, we have a higher education working group, we have within MIT and Harvard are part of something called the Cambridge Campus Compact. So there's a plethora of opportunities for multi-stakeholder engagement across universities and in our case, universities in the city and the private sector from industry to developers, and all starting to raise these questions around opportunities for partnerships. Anything to add, Joe? No.
Thank you. So I'll go back to the last question for Terence for now. In one of your first slides, you talked about the value proposition for on-site and off-site large-scale renewables. Are there comparison of on-site versus off-site issues?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a good question, and I think that both approaches are worth exploring and trying to utilize. Any space that is available on campus is certainly worth exploring deploying solar PV on if you can do it economically. Part of the challenge that exists with on-site is just a scale issue, like we've touched on a couple of times now. Reaching a large scale helps bring the costs down, and most higher ed institutions aren't blessed with sufficient either roof space or land in order to be able to deploy a sufficiently large-scale project to be able to get the same sorts of low prices that you get from a utility-scale project. So on the one hand, from a cost dimension, typically you'll be able to capture much better pricing from a large-scale offsite project. The second piece is from the sustainability or the greenhouse gas goal perspective. As we saw from the staging of how MIT expects to reach its goals over time, you saw they were expecting to obtain about 1 to 3% of their goal from on-site solar. For most organizations, that the potential on-site ranges from anywhere from 1 to 8% for most campuses. So there are limits to how much impact the on-site can have. That's the short answer of it, but we think that both are certainly worth exploring and trying to deploy if possible.
Thank you. So I'll turn to MIT now. A few easy questions at the beginning. You mentioned that the project was cost neutral. Does this statement also include the cost of the RECs?
So we assumed that the RECs weren't worth any money in our financial model. So we retire them, bank them. They're worth quite a bit of money actually, but we didn't count them in the economic model. So we're cost neutral or cost positive without the RECs. Now other partners who have done this type of aggregation, choose to sell the RECs to juice up their economics, but that wasn't the goal of why we did this.
Thank you. How did MIT get the 32% reduction target?
This is Julie. As I mentioned, that emerged out of our year-long dialogue we had on that led to the development of the plan for climate action. And so within those dialogues, we looked at our current emissions portfolio and future trends, and as I mentioned, we decided to align ourselves with, at the time, the Clean Power Plan. So after multiple analyses as to what should be our guiding force, that became at least our initial stake in the ground, again with a commitment to carbon neutrality, with a future commitment to carbon neutrality. But we needed an incremental goal to aim for phase 1.
Thank you. Are the RECs Green E certified by a third party?
So that's a good question. I don't think there's a third party involved, and Terence, maybe you can correct me, but these are actual project RECs that go directly from the eGrid region, PJM, into MIT's account on behalf of Customized Energy Solutions. So they're the original project RECs that have traceable numbers through the PJM grid. We don't need a third party to validate that. That's my understanding.
That's correct, Joe. That's right. Typically, the Green E certification comes from projects that are, RECs that are bought where the origin of the project is not known, or perhaps they're being they're RECs that are being traded and set multiple times, so the RECs change hands a few times and require that stamp of certification. In MIT's case, given that they are obtaining the RECs directly from the project and retiring those immediately, there's no need for a third party to provide Greenie certification.
Thank you. Can you demonstrate additionality through your REC retirements?
Could I start off on that one, Joe or Julie? Before?
Go ahead,
actually, go ahead. Okay. So additionality is a complicated term. It's a term of art within the sustainability space that essentially requires that the only way the project would be viable, economically viable, is due to the value of the environmental attributes. So it essentially takes off the table any projects that make economic sense without the RECs, which is not the case today given the low cost of wind and solar energy. I think what people are more interested in when they refer to additionality is whether the project created a new renewable source of generation on the grid. And that is the claim that folks want to be able to make through their purchase. And given that MIT, Boston Medical Center, and Post Office Square contracted for the long term for the output of a facility that would not have been built without their purchase, they absolutely can make that claim of creating a new renewable capacity. The term additionality, as I said, is one that is a little bit delicate to use because of the technical definition around the economic viability of the project without the environmental attributes.
So this is Joe. I'll add on to that. So that was very important to MIT, was to be able to demonstrate. We wanted to add and be able to demonstrate we significantly added new capacity to the grid. And we've had several legal interpretations. They said this project never would have happened but for the investment or the agreement signed by MIT, Boston Medical, and Post Office Square. So we have that sort of to the level that convinced our critics internally that this truly is an additional project. And I talked a little bit about the coal plant. I mean, that is absolutely the proof in the pudding, that we added capacity to the point where it's replacing coal-powered capacity coming offline, and they're paying us to assume their capacity. So clearly, we are new capacity in the grid that's being monetized. So I don't think you can get any higher proof than that. But it was very important to us to be able to prove that it was an additional project.
And very important to our faculty advisors.
Thank you.
Would you like me to respond to the question on storage real fast?
Sure. So can you address storage research at MIT and the role of solar and storage in your project?
Right. I apologize for not mentioning this earlier. One of the teams that we did tap into, there's a group here called the Transit Lab. There are a number of there are a few groups that have emerged over the past couple of years with MIT faculty who are actually particularly interested in storage. So while we have not activated this quite yet, this is written into our long-term vision for how to leverage the solar test bed and also for future use of the North Carolina site. So again, once we establish that, begin to seek funding for that, there is a group that's basically on deck that's really eager to go and do some testing of storage actually at the North Carolina site itself. So stay tuned on that front.
Thank you, Julie. And there's also a question regarding a curricular. So are there ways that you've been able to leverage this inclusion in aggregate solar projects for curricular purposes?
Again, stay tuned. Yes, we have, well, again, this is brand new. So in the sense that we're just, this is what, it just went active in the past month or so. So the best way to answer is that Joe and I are both giving lectures around campus at the moment in many, from classrooms to administrative meetings. And in the meantime, we're starting to work closely with a faculty member in mechanical engineering on a course in which this would be integrated. This would be a major component of the course. So not to sound, just stay tuned for that as well. You're catching us right when we're coming off the end of this and starting to dive into the research and curriculum, but we have a lot of irons in the fire on that front. I guess the last piece that is Joe actually taught MIT has a unique academic calendar structure in which in January they have independent courses that are offered for credit and non-credit, and Joe actually ran a workshop with the head of utilities here for a full half-day workshop that focused on this and coupled it with an understanding of our central utilities power plant. And that was very well attended by, I believe, over 80 students and researchers alike.
So I'll just share one anecdote. So one of the students, after one of the launch sessions where we kind of put out the press release and we invited students and faculty community to hear about the project, I can't tell you how many times a student has come up to us and said, "Hey, that was my idea. You guys got to it first." So the idea of aggregation and doing something much bigger in terms of scaling solutions. So I thought that was great. But our students are very engaged around what this means potentially.
Thank you. There's a question about the PV panels. What do the developers anticipate will take place after the useful life of the PV panels? So what will happen to the actual panels?
So I think that's, so the developer is actually the owner of the land as well. And I think their vision is that's always going to be a solar farm. I think that other large-scale solar projects that we learned about, they're family farmsteads, and they wanted just the revenue so they could pay the taxes on the farmstead and house, but they might go back to farmland. So I think for this particular project, it'll probably always be a PV site, but in terms of PV panels, one of the research interests we have is how do you recycle the out-of-service panels after 25 years. So it's kind of a materials problem, how you de-risk these projects, time at the end of their useful life. So I think that's a great research opportunity for, what the actual is going to happen to those panels in 25 years.
Excellent question.
Thank you. And if someone wants to start this kind of project on their campus, where is the best place to start the conversation? So either Terence or Julie and Joe can go.
Sure, I'll give my, after you, Joe, and then I'll give my view.
I think there's so many different, different angles. I think it depends if you're a campus that already has a climate action plan and a need to seek off-site opportunities for neutralizing or reducing your emissions, so tying it to that. I mean, ours was the perfect storm of having Joe and I on campus with our backgrounds and able to really take this and both with the idea that you can, how do I say this? Joe and I were able to build a multi-stakeholder group overnight in order to begin to evaluate what the possibilities were. And we both report up to somebody who tends to think about the art of the possible. So I guess the secret ingredient is really understanding where those opportunities are, where the sweet spots are in terms of messaging and to whom to message to, and begin to build that case. The other piece is Joe and I were running due diligence on this. We really teamed up to understand implications from political issues in North Carolina, in this case, to we looked closely at the George Washington and American University aggregation. So I guess my summary, my quick answer is that we running a due diligence, truly understanding best practices like we're sharing with you that you can get from Georgetown, from Stanford, UC Davis, many other examples, and being able to quickly run the business case and then tie that to the university objectives. I would argue, based on our experience, we were able to do that in less than a month. Is that fair, Joe? And then develop an audience.
So I would say the first strike is to find out who's going to be the advocates for it. In this case, Julie and myself.
Yep.
But to walk in the treasurer's office or the finance office, because that's really what this is. This is a financial transaction. And say, hey, Google does this. George Washington and American did this great thing. You know, there's examples of Stanford and, you know, other places. Why wouldn't we do this? Just start with that question. Say, we don't know, but why wouldn't we do this? Why wouldn't it work for us? And say, we want to start a journey and really figure out why this wouldn't work for us. And the more you ask that question, the more evidence you get, well, there's really no reason why it wouldn't work for you. I mean, we tested everything 20 ways to Sunday to try to find the fatal flaw in this. And I think just starting with that question, but starting in the treasurer's office gets enough air cover that it's a prudent financial decision, you know, in terms of a hedge over your energy. It kind of makes it a little more practical other than a feel-good thing. I think that's a significant weight to start there. That's kind of where my first door would be to knock on.
And the only other piece I would add was that, again, through quick experience here, we also figured out how to run it through a risk analysis by talking with our risk team, our communications team, sending them things that we found. We said, all right, is this going to be an issue? You know, should we, without getting to the specifics of those issues but being very open and transparent about the art of the possible, both the positive and the negative, and having everybody on board run through those, as opposed to us coming with an agenda saying, we have to do this. I mean, Joe and I couldn't have been more open to redirection if something had emerged, and they picked up on that quickly. And then clearly, Terrence, just to move to you, I think the partnership, again, I keep coming back to this perfect storm, but it couldn't have happened without the partnership with Customer First Renewables.
Yeah, Julie and Joe, you certainly captured everything better than I could have there. If I can just try to synthesize the couple of key recommendations or suggestions I would make would be assemble a broad team that supports this, and by a broad team I don't necessarily mean a lot of people, but people from a variety of different functions, and really consider the broad range of the value proposition, and don't remain focused just on one component, because there are many different components to it that will resonate with different folks within the organization, and at different times throughout the journey and throughout the conversation you'll have to rely on one or the other to be able to build buy-in, but it's important for you to understand the full range of those from the beginning. So building a broad team and understanding the broad value proposition. Those would be the couple of key points I'd recommend. Okay, Data, anything else?
I am so sorry. I was on mute and talking. So I want to thank Julie, Joe, and Terrence so much for presenting today, and to all who attended. Before we conclude today, I wanted to let you know that our next webinar, titled Developing High-Impact Applied Learning for Sustainability Programs, will explore leading examples of applied learning in sustainability programs. It will take place next Wednesday, March 15 at 3 p.m. For more information, visit our website, where you can also find the schedule of future webinars, workshops, and the conference. And before we end, if I can go to my thank you slide, thank you again to all. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact us. And the recording and presentation materials will be available tomorrow in the ASHE Campus Sustainability Hub, and you will receive an email notification once they are uploaded. Thank you so much, and have a great day.